Welcome to a new segment of Coptic Civilization. I'm Michael Saad. Our guest is Professor Nelly van Doorn-Harder, Professor of Islamic Studies at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you. Welcome to you.
Professor Nelly van Doorn-Harder is an author of several books, a few of them on Islamic topic and a few others on Coptic topics. For example, The Emergence of the Modern Coptic Papacy, which covers the patriarchs of the last 200 years, Coptic nuns, contemporary Coptic nuns, and other books. And on the Islamic side, which she's also an expert in, she published a book specially on entitled Women Shaping Islam, Reading the Quran in Indonesia. Professor van Doorn-Harder was professor of Coptic studies at American University in Cairo in the year 2004. She's also spent several years in Indonesia teaching the interaction between Islam and Christianity, which she is also teaching these days in Wake Forest University in North Carolina. Welcome, Professor. And at the time of the Egyptian Revolution in January 2011, a few weeks later, you published an article entitled, Will Egypt's Arab Spring Include the Copts? And you were somewhat concerned. And your concern was also comparing the Indonesian experience of the last 12 some years with the expectations for the Egyptian revolution and the takeover by Islamists. Please, did you feel that what you were concerned about immediately after the revolution, which direction you assess the current situation and also the future in Egypt?
Well, the reason I wrote that article was that people were all very positive, and you would hear, especially here in the United States, you would hear these radio features praising the Muslim Brotherhood, that they were actually very democratic and that they were very open-minded. But in Indonesia, we had gone actually through almost exactly the same situation when during the revolution of 98-99, when Suharto, the dictator Suharto, fell, that all of a sudden the Islamists who had been very much imprisoned or silenced until then came to the scene and wanted to take over. Now in Egypt they took over, they were elected into the government and parliament. But in Indonesia they also were elected. They didn't get the presidency, but basically their first goal was very much what I saw in Egypt, to get the power, somehow push through laws that would apply Sharia throughout the nation and get their agenda to be the most dominant agenda with basically no consideration for other groups. And I thought, what I observed in Indonesia was that A, half of the society stood up against them, and B, the reason they acted the way they acted was that they often did not have any tools that create a civil society. And I thought the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt doesn't have that either. They have no tools that teach you how to include those who are different, those who have different opinions, those who have other religions. It is just like almost a tunnel vision. And when you have a tunnel vision, you cannot really create a truly democratic, open society. And for the Copts to thrive and be fully accepted, that is really what is needed in a place like Egypt, as it was in Indonesia for the Christians. And so that is where my concern came from. I thought these Muslim brotherhoods should first go back to school and learn the basics of peacemaking techniques and reconciliation, and learn how to reach out to others in a truly authentic way, and not just what you would call window dressing.
Right. As we observe over the years and over history, it starts with a particular minority being oppressed, and then it goes exponential into persecution. And I believe I can characterize the Coptic situation in these terms over the last 40 years. But after one particular minority is oppressed and then persecuted, and then it inflames, you get other minorities, and even the majority become persecuted and oppressed. And that's what we see today, especially 50% of the society, that is women, in Egypt today, are really crushed under the feet of the military, the security and the police, the Muslim Brotherhood government, literally crushed under their feet. So, and we saw this iconic picture or photograph of the lady naked in the street, and then a military army person crushing her chest with his feet. And gosh, this situation, what do we expect from in the society, from the oppression of Copts, then the oppression of women, then the oppression of the secularists, then the oppression of anybody who dares to say no to the Muslim Brotherhood or the Salafis? What's your take on the present and the future?
Well, the thing is this, going from a totalitarian rule to a democracy is not easy. And to let's say, allow other players in your field is difficult. And especially if you have a certain ideological view, which, I mean, in this case, we're speaking about Islamists, but, you know, if it were communists, you could have similar ideas, situations, and others would be suppressed. And so basically, what we now see is all these, I feel it's all little tryouts, like how far can one go? And what they learn is they cannot go as far as they thought they could, because the whole world is watching. We now are much more aware of human rights. And although, you know, people say, oh, that's a Western issue, just now a report appeared, I actually got this link only today, that since President Morsi is in power, the state of human rights in Egypt is far worse than it actually was under Mubarak, strange enough. But because of the things that you are just mentioning, you know, that people are being assaulted, people are being suppressed, and people's rights are literally taken away in view of the whole world. And I think what we need to consider is, you know, it's almost like you have to go back to ground zero. You have to start to re-educate your children. You have to, but you cannot do that unless you really work on the economy, because part of the resistance that we are seeing also has to do with the fact that lots of people have no jobs. The economy is absolutely in shambles. And so the Brotherhood easily says, it's like you say, the secularists, the Christians, they are the ones who are protesting here. But in a way, their group is growing because people are getting very tired of the situation. I must tell you, I did not meet one taxi driver in Egypt or shop owner who did not complain and say that they were deeply, deeply disappointed about what was happening in society. And many of them said, I voted for this president and I would not do this again. And so, in a way, what we what we basically are looking at is a government that has to learn to tolerate resistance. And the resistance, we have to take that seriously. Because when I was in Egypt in January, many people told me, including bishops and Muslims, that the only way for Egypt to find its balance is all those who are against the current Islamist groups that try to basically hold on to the power, if they all unite, if they all stand up, although they might not agree among each other, but if they also realize that, for example, as you're saying, other Muslims are being oppressed as well. It's not just non-Muslims. There's other Muslims, when they have opinions that the Islamists don't agree with, they will oppress them. In Indonesia, we had the incredible tragedy of the Ahmadiyya, who were literally murdered in view of the world. You can see on YouTube, you can see little films where gangs of Islamists literally kill a person in broad daylight, surrounded by others who do not interfere. And so when people realize that this is happening, they have to band together and say, we do not tolerate this, because who is otherwise not going to suffer if you let this go? It will come back to a totalitarian regime of a small group that holds the power and forces its vision on society. And I think that's what we can learn from Egypt too, because there we had or from Indonesia, I mean, we had a lot of resistance from Muslims who did not agree with the Islamists, who actually united with Christian groups. And for example, when the news would come that a church was under attack, Muslim groups would go and help the Christians defend the church. And so it doesn't mean it stops overnight, but it does mean that that power that wants to absorb you, that wants to take over, at one point has to stop. It realizes we cannot really go as far as we would like to. And basically, part of it is that the world is watching. So,
right. As you probably know, that whenever an Islamist attack against Copts or burning church, all what the police does, all what the police does is come in power
right.
after it is over and surround the victims and take them as if they were the aggressors, take them to court and fake evidence so that the judge himself also would be biased. And the victim is sentenced to 15 years in prison for being a victim. And the aggressor, only one person per every 10 years that gets a mediocre sentence. So it's unfortunate. But let me say, ask you a question in this regard. Women's movement in Egypt and perhaps in Indonesia also and around the Islamic world are reinterpreting the Quran. I guess this is, I figure this from the title of your book, Women Shaping Islam, Reading the Quran in Indonesia. How much hope we have from women movement to liberate themselves from masculine, male-dominant practices, pretending to be religious in Islamist, and by doing so, they will liberate themselves, that's the women, and also other persecuted groups and minorities.
I think what you said at the very last is very important. It's, for example, I spoke with Professor Shahira Mahrez, who is a member of the Popular Alliance Socialist Party, that is not a religious party. But first of all, she really stressed the point. She said, we all have to be aware of the harassment against us, whether we are Copts or not. She herself, she's born a Muslim and a practicing Muslim. She herself spent months in court fighting off an accusation that was false, that she had explosives in her car, and she's a 70-year-old woman. Think about that. And so the role of the women in all kinds of levels is very important. Now, in Indonesia, you have a very strong women's movement, and again, they were in the forefront against that Islamist move, that tidal wave that tried to take over. They were in the forefront in fighting against it, and sometimes at great risk for their lives. But what they did, they would go back and look at the Quran and say, okay, what does it say? You tell me that I have to do this, and it is based on the Holy Scriptures. I read the Holy Scriptures in a different way, and so can we discuss? And of course, the answer was no, we can't discuss. So they would find other partners of discussion, and then they would also find non-Muslim partners to say, okay, when I read my Holy Scriptures, I see a message of justice, and I see a message of respect for everybody. And from there, they would try to convince male leaders, but they would also unite with non-Muslims. And in Indonesia, that's Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, and in this case, Ahmadiyas, to create an anti-movement. And basically, it comes down to creating new civic groups, new forms of civic society. Because people who are Islamists, they only have one type of civic society in their head, and it's a civic society that should be ruled by them. And so to go against that, you have to break the system open by looking at other forms of civic society. And what they did in Indonesia was they would take up issues. For example, in Indonesia, at one point, you had this huge drive for polygamy, that every man should have more than one wife. And so the women would go, say, why? This is actually a civil servant in Indonesia is not allowed to marry more than one wife. And so what they did, they reinterpreted the marriage law and started it with a marriage is a union between a woman and a man, only one, right? And so, and then they got a lot of criticism, but the criticism by itself helped them to raise the issue and discuss it. So they came on TV, they were in the newspapers, and everybody all of a sudden was discussing polygamy. And they even asked me to write a piece about it, what I thought about it. I said, I don't know very much about it, but for example, then I went and looked at the Mormons in America and somehow reflected on what is happening here, because I'm not a Muslim and I'm not in such a union. But just raising an issue and keeping it in the public eye is very important, and that is something I think that everybody in the resistance in Egypt should be doing, and which they already are doing as much as they can.
So actually, you are promoting a dialogue and an intellectual movement, but also a kind of protest by women to gain human rights, by appealing to the same sacred text that men of bad intention are using or abusing to persecute women.
Yeah. Well,
so are you optimistic with this movement? Is the women movement heating up or being crushed before it starts?
Well, in a place like Indonesia, they have learned very quickly that true movements start from below. That is why President Mursi's for a national debate for reconciliation fell flat. It doesn't come from the top, it comes from below. It starts at groups that are fighting together in villages, groups that can't stand each other in the workplace. They realize that, and they realize that by starting from below and create awareness about these issues among individuals and among people who basically maybe never think about that. But, for example, you are in a village, you have a poor family, and someone comes and asks if their daughter can be his third or fourth wife, yeah? Well, by starting the discussion below, you create awareness among these people that they think twice before they say yes. And then what they try to do is bring it up to the level of the leaders, that the leaders would start to reflect on this and write their own opinions. Of course, they cannot say it's forbidden because it is in the Quran. But what they can say is, well, it is not forbidden, but these are the negative aspects of such a union. And then from there, they try to bring it higher, that, for example, it goes into governmental circles, that it can even become law, that it's only very strict, under very strict conditions can someone do this. And basically the whole idea is that women should be protected. Now, I'm talking about something that has nothing to do with Christianity, but the whole issue is, if there is a certain mindset in a society, that becomes like an oil patch. It grows and grows and grows and will infect all kinds of elements of that society. And that is basically what they try to work against. I mean, another example I once gave was about violence against women. Again, you know, based on the Quran, many women thought that their husband could really beat them almost to death or into the hospital. And these groups have managed to create new ways of thinking about this, and then that went and became a law, a national law, that violence against women was forbidden. And when it was a national law, it actually protected all women, not just Muslim women. It protected Hindu women, Buddhist women in Indonesia, because you have more than 2 religions there.
Thank you so much, Professor Nelly van Doorn-Harder, for enlightening us on Christians and the Arab Spring in Egypt, and of course what we heard about also in Indonesia, and same trouble and almost disaster in Iraq and Syria and Palestine and Lebanon. So let us pray that the situation improves and that national movements among women and among other minorities result in improved situation for human rights in the Middle East. Thank you for watching Coptic Civilization. I'm Michael Saad.
Choice